Okay, so what I wanted to focus in with the data set that we were given was Sony's PlayStation platform. I wanted to look into this because the PS5 is kind of a big system being released right now, and it's really hard for people to get. So I thought that it was relevant to look at Sony's past performance, their past systems that they've released, specifically their flagship ones. There were a few other systems in the list that we were given, but they were more handheld systems and less prevalent, so I didn't want those in there because I thought these were more comparable. Each major flagship PlayStation system. And so, what I looked at initially was just the timeline of the overall sales, and it shows a decrease over time, kind of a negative trend after the peak in two, between 2000 and 2005. And then along that line, I wanted to plot where each release date was. And as you can look, it's kind of interesting. At the beginning, like over here when the PlayStation was released, sales increased for quite a long time, like from 1994 to 1998. So 8 solid years of increases. And then right before the PS2 was released, they declined, and then they went up only for 2 years before having a decline. And then when the PS3 was released, it only had 2 years as well. And then the PS4, when it was released, it actually only had 1 year of slight growth, which I thought was um, it was pretty interesting because that was like the big console when it came out back in its day, which is 2013, as I put in there. And so I wanted to kind of look at why that might be the factor, or what might be the contributing factor outside of popularity, or just the gaming world together, or the people who are actually consuming it. I wanted to look at what other factors might be at play. And what I found was that there was a strong correlation between the amount of games or titles produced and total sales. And so the correlation ended up being almost perfect, I guess you could say, with an R squared value of 0.966. And within that graph, I added interactivity by when you hover over each of these points, it would highlight the corresponding bar on the bar chart to the right of it. So you could kind of get an idea, not just where it was on the um, scatter plot, but also so you can get like a visual representation against the measures in the bottom down here, the kind of like the scale, the x-axis. And what I thought was interesting as well is that the PS4, the original PlayStation, and then the PS2 up here, it's on a relatively straight path, and then you have the PS3 over here, which just by looking at it, you would think that it performed worse. But if you look at the amount of titles relative to the amount of sales that it had, it was actually more efficient than any of the other three systems that were out. So for whatever reason, the PS3, there was a greater bang for their buck, I guess you could say, as far as just looking at titles relative to sales. And then that brings me over to the bar chart, which was fairly simple. I just wanted to, as I said earlier, give a good visualization of like the size comparison of how much more the PS2 was able to sell than, I mean, look at how the difference between that and the PS4. It's quite drastic. A factor of, what would that be? Uh, 278 million versus over a billion. It's like a magnitude of 5 or 6. I think 6. But anyways, I just wanted to get that visual representation to see just how much of a difference there was. I would think it would be interesting to go beyond the data that is here and just look at why there were so many more titles for the PS2 back in a time where the technology was still kind of in its infancy as far as like um, the graphics levels. I mean, I know there was like the Atari and all those other types of gaming systems, but nothing quite came to the level of like the consoles that PlayStation was putting out. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and I think it's also important to note that the PS4 at the time that this data was released, there's only about 2 years of solid, or 2 or 3 years of solid sales data, because in 2017 they hadn't recorded any yet. I'm assuming that it was just an empty. They hadn't reported the data for it, but it only had 3 years of solid data to really look at. So I'm sure as time goes on, the sales and the titles would increase, and it would follow that general trend that we see with these other gaming systems. I would be interested to see if it would be more efficient or less efficient, and what the PS5 numbers would look like